Hello, welcome everyone. We'll give folks another couple minutes here to get signed in and settled before we begin. As we wait, I thought it might be a good time to let you guys know about Know to Grow, Connect, Relate, Cultivate. Our goal is simple, to give you the opportunity to meet some of your local farmers and ranchers in the county. Perhaps through meeting, you might converse. You might like each other. You might become friends. Maybe you have somewhere to ask agricultural questions and not get the Google reply, which is wrong or incomplete 9 out of 8 or 8 out of 10 times. Sorry. Through events and activities, Know to Grow is a chance for us all to connect, perhaps relate, and even possibly cultivate something great. Keep in the loop for what's to come for our Know to Grow, Connect, Relate, Cultivate Facebook group, or email me at adelaney@rdcounty.ca. All right. Hey everyone, welcome to our very first Know to Grow event. We're going to do a short documentary showing of the Guardians of the Grasslands, which explores the current state of the world's most endangered ecosystem, our very own Great Plains grasslands, and the role that the cattle and their farmers play in its survival. With the amount of folks interested in local food growing each and every day, it's really important to know the truth about how and why agriculture is done and the people that do it. There's so much more to it than just the tasty food. We've also organized a panel of local cattle farmers. So while watching Guardians of the Grasslands, if you have any questions about cows, farmers, or agriculture, please feel free to write your questions in the chat box or raise your virtual hand so we can turn on your mic and you can ask your question verbally when we open up that panel. As a reminder, we'll also be doing a draw for a 111 date night in for anybody who's participating in today's Zoom webinar, the winner of which will be contacted directly, but we'll also put a shout out to them on our fancy Know to Grow Facebook page. Remember, if you're not a member already, please feel free to come and join us there. Now, because film quality here may vary depending on broadband, we will post this documentary onto our Know to Grow Facebook page for the next hour after this webinar for your viewing pleasures. But it's not ours, so we don't have permanent ownership, so catch it while you can. We'll also try to get today's question and answers on that Facebook page as well. So if you're curious what some of the answers were, or maybe there's some questions that we didn't get around to asking online, we'll put those there as well. Before we begin, I just have a couple last notes. You guys are all currently set to mute. Questions can be asked at any time through the chat, which can be found on the bottom toolbar of this webinar. Just move your mouse and it should pop up. Or you can ask your questions verbally at the end of the showing. Again, to do so, please raise your hand, also at the bottom of the toolbar, and we'll unmute you during the panel. The responses given by the farmer panel are their opinions and their practices alone. They're not answering on behalf of industry as a whole, but rather as individual people for their individual farms. Please keep this in mind. And lastly, we're asking that everybody keep it respectful and friendly. We may have differing opinions at times, but we should and will keep it respectful here. Okay, without further ado, we will introduce you to your farmer panel. So first, if we can get everybody's pictures popped up here.
Okay.
Okay, so first we have Jana Woke and Mark Christian. They operate a small cattle ranch southwest of Red Deer. They raise Black Angus and Speckled Park cattle on several acres with riparian habitat in the Red Deer River watershed. Also noting, Jana is a very active member on our Know to Grow Project Advisory Committee. So thank you, Mark and Jana. We'll just get you guys to give them a quick wave. Thank you. Next up, we have Adrian Herron. Adrian is a steward of land south of Pine Lake in Red Deer County with a herd of weird Japanese Wagyu cows and Angus cattle. Adrian firmly believes in a mutually beneficial relationship between ranching and the natural environment. Give us a wave. Thanks, Adrian. And then last but not least, we have Matt Martinson. Matt farms with his family along the western border of Red Deer County in the Eckville area. The Martinson family operate a mixed farm, including raising cows and calves, as well as growing annual and perennial crops like barley, wheat, and alfalfa. And then there's Heather Hallwis and I. You saw her briefly earlier. We are the Red Deer County Egg Services Department, or part of, we represent. And we're kind of working the controls here of the Zoom and kind of hosting this. So please bear with us and work with any glitches that come out of it. Okay, deep breath. We're ready to go. I'm done talking. Welcome and please enjoy Guardians of the Grasslands. So there we have it. One of our most endangered ecosystems in the entire world is right here, right out our back door. And if you're thinking, well, that's southern Alberta, I just like to point out the amount of grasslands we have right here in and around Red Deer County. They're vast. In fact, located Red Deer, right here, right where we are, is located right on the cusp of the Great Plains. Our farmers are experts on raising cattle and being stewards of this land. So with that, I'd like to open up our farmer panel to any questions that you guys, the audience, might have with this first one that came in. So I am going to pose this question to everybody here. We can get you guys back on your cameras. So perhaps starting with Jana and Mark first. What are the best and worst parts about being a cattle farmer?
That's a really great question. For me, I would say that the best part of being a cattle rancher is spending time outside in nature, not just with our animals, our cattle and our horses, but also with all the wildlife we see that's supported on the ranch that we manage. And we have a huge number of wildlife that we support, from various species of fish, frogs, rodents like beavers, lots of mammals, moose, deer, and that's definitely a highlight of being a cattle rancher. Also, I would say sharing that experience with our 4 boys and teaching them what it means to not only be good land stewards, but also to have a good land ethic in terms of how we manage everything, and teaching that next generation of what it is that they can do moving forward.
Wow, my turn. It is being close to nature. That's the biggest pro of all. You're always in the thick of it, and it's actually just yesterday I saw another species of bird that I haven't seen in our area for as long as I've known. So, there's always a surprise for me when you're involved in being part of nature. It's never mundane.
Perfect. Thank you, Adrian.
I would definitely echo what Jenna and Mark had said. It's a beautiful thing to live with the cycles of nature and to observe the seasons and the things that come and go. And it's very rewarding to to build a herd of cattle, to remember, when you have a cow that calves. I'm in the middle of calving right now, and I have a cow that calved, and I remember the day that she was born and the day that her mom was born. And it's truly a privilege to share my life with the animals, the sentient beings around me. And that includes the wildlife that go through the riparian corridor on the land that I manage, and the large browsers. And it's also a privilege to provide safe, healthy, world-class beef to my friends and my family and my community and my country. It sounds a little 4-H-y there for you, but that's definitely a highlight. I would say some of the struggles are some of the unknowns when you ranch, and that's, it's a double-edged sword. It's a amazing thing to be able to problem solve, and people often ask me what a typical day on the ranch is like, and there really isn't one type of typical day. You never know what you might get. And so that can be really rewarding and very challenging. And then there's always lots of external factors that influence once you leave the ranch. So what your calves are going to sell for, what's going on in the market around you that you don't have any control over. So those are definitely some of the challenges.
Definitely sounds challenging. And what about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the same that Jana and Mark and Adrian said. I think we all get into this, stay in this for a lot of the same reasons. And maybe for me, I really like being around the animals and, seeing, like Adrian mentioned, the progression and being able to tell a story about, that cow, and, it was born by the tree on the -30 day. And, it's just really nice to share that, with our family, and have our herd that's been built, over 40 plus years, kind of something that's ours and shared, and that we can always build on. So, I think that's something that I really appreciate amongst all the other things that were already shared. And I think probably the worst, we calve in February, so the worst has got to be getting up in the middle of the night when it's -30 and just hoping there's no new calves, and then having to deal with something, and of course those are always the least fun times, but even those times are rewarding, because hopefully at the end you have a nice lively calf that hopefully appreciates the efforts. So I'd say probably that's it for me. Thanks.
Perfect. So it seems like you're all kind of on the same page. There's so many rewarding things about what's going on out there and on the land, and getting to be a part of it. But there are some struggles that we do seem to face, and they come on a regular basis. So like everybody else, we deal with them as we can, and we try to deal with them the best way we can. So thank you, guys. It looks like another question we have here. So this one's a little bit related to the movie, and this question itself is asked in a way about bison, but I'll bring it back to your guys' situations, recognizing you're not bison producers, nor are you guys from these national park areas. But so when you guys are introducing your cattle to, say, a new pasture, or it's been a few years in a rotation of hitting a pasture, do you guys see any benefits out of letting cattle into that area, or do you see a decline go into the land? And I think to start it off this time, we'll start with Adrian, if that works.
Thanks, Amy. That's a challenging question. Like you said, I raise cattle, but I try and use my cattle to mimic the impact that bison would have had on grasslands. And so in my experience managing different areas, so a good example would be an area that may have been disturbed, and I've had some Canadian thistle come up into that area. I'll strategically place something that cattle want, like salt or mineral, into that area, and their action of their hooves on the land actually works to break up the soil again. And, they'll graze and lay and loaf and romp on that thistle, breaking it up. So they're actually doing what they naturally do, and they're doing a service for us in terms of possibly removing a species of plants that we're less interested in having in our pastures. So I've seen that, and in some older pastures that I've had that haven't been grazed, it's really exciting to see the old dead thatch come up. So all the dead grass comes up, and then the next year and the year after that, you start to actually see different species of grass and forbs and legumes that start to come back. That's really exciting to me when I watch the land change, and the impact that cattle and their hooves and their grazing can have is really phenomenal. And it's just what they do naturally. It's up to us to figure out how to harness that natural ability of theirs and to use it that benefits the cattle and the lands and the wildlife, and myself as a cattle producer. I would encourage anyone who's interested in something along the lines of Banff and the bison reintroduction to look at a video you can find online. And it's about when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone Park. And it's called How Wolves Change Rivers. And it talks about how wolves are a keystone predatory species in Yellowstone National Park, and how their reintroduction actually changed the flow of rivers through Yellowstone. So that's a really good resource for someone who would be interested in that.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrienne. And so what about you, Matt? You guys have a fairly big operation. What do you find when you're introducing cattle to a new pasture or an area that they haven't been for a while?
Yeah, I think, similar to what was talked about in the movie, you start seeing a lot of new or species you hadn't seen in a while come back because, you've gone ahead and you've grazed some of that that old thatch layer that hasn't been taken in the past, and then you start seeing the multi-story canopies start to kind of happen very quickly. And that, for me, that's something that's the most eye-catching, is you see a very linear grass stand with one canopy, and then really within a month or 6 weeks you can start identifying 2 or 3 different canopies within that grass stand. So for me, that's the biggest thing. But I think the other neat thing that we see, unrelated to the actual grass themselves, is some of the other species that very quickly come back and start working with the cattle again. And I like watching the little cowbirds, we call them, scamper around and eat insects that the cows kind of scare up. And then you get the red-tailed hawks hunting over the backs of moving cows, especially when we're moving them. They scare up mice, and the hawks find out in a real hurry that that's a good way to catch a mouse that would normally be standing still and they'd never see. So, I really like that. And I think when you see that really underpins that concept that we really kind of are just a part of the cycle on the grasslands, whether they're native or improved pasture like most of us are grazing on here in Central Alberta. We really are a part of a cycle and an overall system, and I like that, and I like watching that, even as just we move from one pasture to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking with all of the riparian cattle work that Jenna and Mark do, the species, we actually have a question that relates to it. What sort of biodiversity do you see in grasslands here in Red Deer County? Specific wild plants or animals that pop out in your mind?
There we go.
There we go.
Got it. We had trouble with our microphone.
Well, again, the species diversity you're talking about. when we acquired a piece of land about 20 years ago now, it was quite overgrazed and just overutilized in terms of just basically over farmed. And since we've had it in our management situation, it was just last night I was commenting again how to Jana that we hear when you open the windows at night, you hear so many frogs, like, and when we first got the place, we didn't hear them at all. So in the last 20 years, and I think frogs are one thing that tell you if your riparian areas are healthy, and it's a symphony out there at night. And if you have the windows open all night, if you're a light sleeper, you won't sleep. So that's one of the key things I've noticed.
And I would add to that yes, when we purchased this particular quarter of land, there was a riparian area. It's a drainage into the Red Deer River, and it was overutilized. We had a lot of native grass species. We did not see a lot of bird diversity or any other wildlife species diversity. What we did was we fenced it off and we left it to rest. And what we saw over the past 20 years was a gradual increase in the number of birds, as well as the number of frogs and the quantity of each of those particular species. In addition, we also saw that the native seed bank that was in the soil actually started to show itself. So all of a sudden we had native grasses like sweetgrass. We also had a plethora of native forbs that started growing in this coulee pasture that we have, and it was really quite remarkable. You could smell the sweetgrass in the spring, you can smell the mint, shooting star, and just a huge variety of diversity. It really, really changed with rest. Having said that, though, we started to rest it too much. And what happened was we didn't have mint anymore, and we didn't have sweetgrass anymore, and we've lost the shooting stars because we haven't had enough disturbance to keep that cycle of diversity. So we needed to rest it initially for that particular pasture to recover, but then we also needed to manage it thereafter where we had enough disturbance that we kept that diversity. So what we've done now is we've started looking at, we need to still have some sort of disturbance within that coulee pasture, but it is a tricky pasture to manage because we have really dry southwest facing slopes, but also very wet valley bottoms, and so it's really tricky in terms of management. But it's a good example of needing to rest in order to see that native seed bank show itself again, but also having that disturbance which allows that diversity, which is exactly what they talked about in the Guardians of the Grasslands. So it is really important to have a certain amount of disturbance.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it takes that fire to bring on the new growth. Yeah, and we see that all across the board, really, from the wildfires that they set in the national parks to our farm and conservation here on our grasslands. So that again brought me right into our next question, and I'll focus this one maybe at Adrian. How do you determine when to rotate your herds into new pastures?
That's a great question. Again, trying to mimic the behavior that bison would have done to the land and the grasslands. I have a couple of there's lots of different ways that you can manage those pastures. And I look at things like, and it's going to come out like a very wiggly answer because it depends is kind of the very best answer I can give you. But I look at things like how wet the year is, how wet the spring's been, when did I graze that pasture last year, how many days of rest has it had, what stage of growth is the grass in, what's the season looking like. The last couple of years we've had some funny seasons where it's been very, very dry and then wet later, or it's a very wiggly answer to what should be a very straightforward question. And then seasonality too. I'll have pastures that are further away from home, and I like to have them at home if I can. That's a little bit harder on the home quarter. So moving those cows at a different time in a season to a different piece of land helps graze down different species with a different glimpse in time. Same using grass after the frosts have come and the grass has gone into hibernation, if you'd call it. Using those grasses into the fall, again, removing some of that thatch. I really try and observe the land around me and see what kind of shape it's in, how much forage is left, and sort of put together a little bit of a plan going forward. And then, of course, every day is a different story and it changes. So I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely. I think so. It's like anything else. You don't mow your lawn when it's raining. You don't paint your walls when it's wet or whatever the case. So, understandably, you move your cows to the pastures that they are most suited to for that particular time and the needs that you're looking for. Awesome. So we are kind of getting down to the end of it. So I wanted to ask you guys one last question, and maybe I'll focus this one towards Matt because he's been a little quiet here. So Matt, what do you think that local folks from the city of Red Deer, for example, would be able to do to support you or our other local farmers in producing their beef, whether local or in the bigger markets?
Well, I mean, obviously the one of the more obvious things is to buy our beef, or buy local beef when you can, and when you're aware that it's certainly local beef. But I think maybe getting beyond scratching the surface of just buying our product is maybe reserving your judgment about how we operate and what we do, how we treat the environment and how we treat our animals. Reserve that to kind of investigate in it yourself. Don't maybe listen to what the first thing that pops up on the internet is, or even necessarily some of the mainstream news. And unfortunately, we can't even rely there in a lot of instances for solid information about our industry. And so, I think the best thing for a lot of us moving forward is that the right information gets out to the folks that are consuming our product. And so I think, being careful of where you get that. And I'd be a lot more comfortable knowing that a consumer got that from anybody sitting on this panel, from somebody that does it. I don't really care who it is, because as we found out in the introductions, we are a lot alike in a lot of senses. So, get your information from a farmer, from somebody that's in the industry, and not, just an unnamed media source that might not necessarily have the facts. I think that would be the biggest one for me.
Yeah, does anybody have anything that they want to add to that? No worries. Perfect. I think that rounds this out wonderfully. We had some really great questions from you guys, the audience. And before we let this thing go in for too long, we're just going to cut it off there. So thank you to our farmer panel for being open and honest about you guys and your operations and what you guys are doing out there on the land. Thank you to our great audience for joining us. Again, for the questions that weren't asked today, and for the questions that were and all the good answers that we got, we're going to try and put those out on our Facebook page. So be sure to click in and join that if you can. And thank you again for joining us. Please enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your Mother's Day weekend. Be sure to keep an eye out for the next upcoming Know to Grow events through our Facebook page, or again by emailing me at adelaney@rdcounty.ca. And with that, stay safe and sound, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.